There is a kind of silence a house learns the way a person learns grief. Eastmoor had learned it 8 years before, on the night its music stopped. It had kept that silence so long and so well that the young servants had grown up inside it. They did not know the house had ever held any other sound. Once there had been music in every room. The old Duchess of Whitlock had filled the place with it. She had played the great gilded harp in the long drawing-room until midnight. She had taught the village girls their scales. She had sung to her son in the dark when he could not sleep. Then a fever took her in 3 days, in an autumn very like this one. Her son was a boy of 23 that year. He had the harp carried up to a cold north room and covered in a holland sheet. He gave an order that was never written down and never once broken. There would be no more music at Eastmoor. He was 31 now. He was Giles, Duke of Whitlock, and he had kept the silence 8 years, the way another man keeps a grave. He was a tall man with a still guarded face. His eyes were a tawny brown that gave very little away. His hair was ash brown, going quietly darker at the temples. People called him cold. He let them. It was easier than the truth. The truth was only that he had loved one person past all sense and lost her, and decided that the cure for loving was not to love again. Into this silent house, that autumn, came Rosamond Renham. She came the way the poor come into great houses. She came by the side door at dusk, with one box and no welcome. She was 23. She had a pale, grave face, fine dark brows, and steady grey eyes that had learned to give nothing away. Her hands were the first thing anyone noticed who noticed hands at all. They were long and clever, and very strong for so slight a woman. They were the hands of someone who had done a difficult thing every day of her life since she was 6 years old. She was pretty, in the quiet way that is easy to look past. And she had been raised, until she was 17, to be exactly the kind of young woman who is welcomed by the front door. Her father had been a gentleman. Not a rich one, but a gentleman, with books and a good name and a small pretty estate in the next county. Her mother had been something rarer. Her mother had been an artist. She had played the harp the way water finds the sea, without effort and without pause. She had taught her daughter from the moment the child could sit up alone. Rosamond kept one memory above all the others, her oldest and dearest. She was a very small girl, sitting inside the frame of the great harp, in the cave of sound her mother made. She could feel the music come up through the floor and into her bones. Both her parents were dead now. The mother went first, of a long illness. The father followed, of a short one that was mostly ruin. There had been a bank and a bad friend, and a signature her father should never have set to paper. When the debts were counted, everything went. The house went. The harp went. The books went. The good name went last, and it went hardest of all. Rosamond was left at 17 with a black gown, a great gift she could not sell, and a younger brother to keep alive. The brother was the whole reason she had come to Eastmoor. His name was Edmund. He was 17 now, the age she had been when the world fell in. He had their father's warmth and none of his caution. He was not wicked. She held to that in the dark, on the nights it was hard to hold to anything. He was only young, and poor, and angry at being poor. He had fallen in with a set of young men in the town who had money to lose. They lent it freely to a boy who had none. The debt grew the way such debts grow, quietly, and then all at once. Now there was a sum owing that Edmund could not pay, to men who did not forgive. There was one road out. A commission, if he could be got into the army, into a decent regiment, under a colonel who would take him in hand, he would be beyond the reach of the town. He would be set on an honest road at last. But a commission cost money. It cost more money than a girl earns, with her needle, in 3 years of nights. She had thought it through, the way she thought through everything, in the cold, without pity for herself. She could go on with her needle and watch him sink, or she could sell the one thing that would fetch a real wage and buy him clear before the men in the town lost patience and did the thing such men do. There was no third road. There is rarely a third road for the poor. The rich are forgiven their follies, or they buy the forgiveness. The poor pay for theirs in full, and often someone else does the paying. Rosamond had decided, dry-eyed, that she would be the someone. He was all the family she had left in the world. She had held him as a baby. She had taught him his letters at the same table where their mother taught her the harp. Whatever he had done, he was hers to save. So she would save him, and she would not let him see what it cost her. A boy saved at the price of his sister's whole heart is a boy who never quite stands straight again. So she wrote to him steadily, and told him none of the cost, and only that a way was being found. And she kept the black gown, and the great useless gift, and she carried both into service as another woman carries a wound she has learned to walk on. So Rosamond had done the one thing left to her. She had gone to an agency in London, a discreet place that placed gentlewomen in great houses. She had offered the only thing she owned that was worth a wage. She could play. She could play better than any lady who would ever hire her, though she never said so. And great houses, now and then, wanted music they did not have to marry into the family to obtain. Eastmoor wanted a harpist. That was the word the agency used, and Rosamond had thought it strange, for she had heard the house was a silent one. She did not yet understand that the wanting had not come from the Duke. It had come from a guest. Lady Honoria Ashcombe was staying at Eastmoor that autumn. She meant to leave it as the next Duchess of Whitlock. She was very beautiful. It must be said plainly, because it was the first fact about her, and the one she had built her life upon. She had golden hair and a white neck, and a way of entering a room that made older women touch their own throats. She was clever, too, in the narrow, patient way of a woman who has decided a thing is owed her. She had only to arrange for the world to deliver it. And she had decided, the summer before, that the thing owed her was Giles of Whitlock. She wanted his title. She wanted his fortune. She wanted his silent house to fill with the right sort of noise. She sang. She sang the way beautiful women are taught to sing, prettily and a little flat. She wanted an accompanist, not a rival, never a rival. She wanted a pair of hands in the corner that would follow her voice and make it sound better than it was. She wanted those hands to vanish the moment she stopped needing them. So she had asked the dowager to send to town for a harpist. Some poor genteel creature, she said, who would be grateful and quiet and no trouble. And the dowager, for reasons of her own, had agreed. The dowager was the last piece of Eastmoor, and in some ways the strangest. She was the Duke's great-aunt, Lady Tryphena, a very old woman of near 80. She had outlived 3 kings and every person she had started life with. She was small and dry and sharp as a tack in October. She missed nothing. She said little, and what she said was often unkind on its surface, and rarely unkind underneath. She had loved the dead Duchess like a daughter. She had watched her great-nephew wall himself up alive for 8 years, and had said nothing, because she knew the uselessness of telling a grieving man to grieve less. But she was old, and she was tired of silence. When Lady Honoria asked for a harpist, Lady Tryphena said yes, for a reason that had nothing to do with Lady Honoria at all. She wanted, before she died, to hear the harp in that house again, even if it was only a hired girl playing waltzes for a fool. So Rosamond came, and the house closed around her the way great houses do around the people they pay. It closed completely, and without seeing her at all. She was given a small room at the top of the servants' stair. It was warmer than she had feared, and colder than she had hoped. She was neither servant nor guest, and so she belonged nowhere, and ate alone, and was spoken to only when she was wanted. She was wanted most evenings. She would come down to the long drawing-room after dinner, when the company gathered. She would sit at the small harp that had been hired with her from town. She would play what she was told to play. For 2 hours each night, she was a piece of the furniture that happened to make sound. She learned the house quickly, the way the poor learn the houses they enter, from below. She learned that the north room was never opened. She learned that no one played there, and no one sang but Lady Honoria. She learned that the silence in the house was the shape of a missing sound. She learned, too, what kind of man keeps such a silence for 8 years? Not a hard man, whatever the county said. A hard man forgets in a season and marries in a year. Only a man who has loved past all reason keeps the door of a dead room shut for the better part of a decade. He was not cold. He was frozen, which is a different thing, and a curable one, though no one at Eastmoor believed it could be cured. Rosamond believed it. She had been frozen herself. She knew the look of it from the inside, and she knew that under the ice a thing may go on living a long time, waiting for a warmth it has stopped expecting. The Duke came to the drawing-room each evening and sat through the music, with a face like a shut door. He left the moment it was decent to leave. He had loved his mother past sense, and the mother had played, and the music had died with her. No one told Rosamond this. She worked it out. She was good at working things out. It was another thing grief teaches. She learned, too, exactly what Lady Honoria wanted of her. It was nothing and everything. Nothing that could be admired. Everything that could serve. You will play softly, Lady Honoria told her the first evening. She did not look at Rosamond as she said it. She was arranging her own music on the stand. Under the conversation. Nothing showy. When I sing, you will follow me, and you will not flourish. Do you understand? Simple things. A simple waltz. Wallpaper. I do not want to hear the harp. I want the room to feel pleasant. Can you do that? Yes, my lady, said Rosamond. Good. And Lady Honoria smiled, the way one smiles at a well-trained horse, and turned away and forgot her. Rosamond could do that. She could play wallpaper. She had swallowed worse than this for Edmund's sake. She would swallow worse still. And each night that she played, she thought not of the music, but of the sum, the growing sum, the wage laid by shilling on shilling, in a stocking, in her cold room at the top of the stair. It climbed slowly toward the price of her brother's life. She had learned to play beautifully and mean nothing by it. It was, she sometimes thought, the saddest skill she owned. 3 weeks passed like this. 3 weeks of soft waltzes under the talk. 3 weeks of following Lady Honoria's pretty flat voice and making it sound better than God had made it. 3 weeks of being looked through by a room full of people who would not have known her face on the road the next morning. The Duke never spoke to her. She was not sure he had ever once looked at her. He sat each night in the same chair, half in shadow, enduring the music his mother's house was not supposed to hold. On the nights his face was worst, Rosamond played more softly still. She never knew whether he noticed the mercy. And then came the night of the simple waltz. It was late October, and it was cold. There was to be a large dinner, the largest of the season, with people driving in from 20 miles about. Lady Honoria was in a high, brittle temper all day. The dinner was, in her mind, a stage. The Duke was the only man in the audience. She meant to be perfect upon it. She sent for Rosamond in the afternoon. "Tonight you will play through the whole of dinner and after," she said. "Softly, in the small saloon that opens off the dining room, so it carries but does not intrude. A simple waltz, over and over. It does not signify what. Only keep it going and keep it quiet. When we come through, I shall sing, and you will accompany me, and then you may stop. You are to be heard and not noticed. That is the whole of your art tonight." "Yes, my lady," said Rosamond. And so, that evening, the great dinner went forward in one room in a blaze of candles and talk. In the next room, alone at the harp, in the small dim saloon, Rosamond played a simple waltz, softly, over and over, into a space with no one in it. She could hear them through the wall, the clash of glass, the tide of voices, the high bright ring of Lady Honoria's laugh pitched across the room for one particular man's ears. She played on. One waltz, and then another. The plainest things she knew. It was the sort of music that asks nothing, and is owed nothing. Her hands did it without her, as they had done it 1,000 times before, and her mind went where her hands did not need it. It went to Edmund. It went to the last letter, and the men in the town, and the shortening days. It went to the sum in the stocking that was still not enough. She thought of her mother, too, as she played, because the waltz would not let her be. It is a cruel thing to keep a great gift and be forbidden to use it. All those years her mother had poured herself into the harp without shame or stint, in a house that loved her for it. Rosamond had inherited the gift entire, but the house that loved it was sold. Now the gift earned its bread in corners, gagged and softened, told to make no impression on the air. She had learned to hold the whole of herself an inch back from the strings. It was like breathing through a cloth. You can do it for a long time. You can do it for years. But the body remembers what a full breath was, and grieves for it in secret. And now and then, when it is very tired, it forgets to keep pretending that a shallow one is enough. The dinner ran long. The waltz ran on. And somewhere in the second hour, alone in the dim room, with the whole bright house turned away from her, something in Rosamond Renham quietly gave way. She was very tired. That was all it was, she told herself after. She was tired to the bone of playing beautifully and meaning nothing. She was tired of the sum that would not fill. She was tired of being furniture in a house that had buried its own music and hired hers to keep the corpse warm. Her fingers, of their own accord, let the simple waltz slow. And into the space where it had been, without her quite deciding it, came something else. It was her mother's piece. It had no name. Her mother had made it in the last good year, and played it in the evenings, and never written it down. So when she died, it lived nowhere in the world, but in her daughter's 2 hands. Rosamond had not played it since the house was sold. She had not dared. It was too much herself. But it came now, in the dim saloon, with the bright house turned away. She let it come, because she was tired, and because for once no one in the world was listening. She played it as her mother had played it. Then she played it as no one had ever played it. She put into it everything she had spent 3 years learning not to feel. She put in the sold house. She put in her father's face. She put in Edmund, and the town, and the sun, and the cold room at the top of the stair. She put in 3 weeks of soft waltzes, and 3 years of black gowns, and every night she had made beauty and meant nothing. She stopped meaning nothing. She meant all of it, with both hands, in the dark, alone. The music rose in that dead, silent house, like a thing coming back to life. It was not loud. It did not need to be loud. It was true, and truth carries. It went out through the open door of the little saloon, and along the cold passage. It went up into the rooms that had held no music in 8 years. It woke the house the way the first warm day wakes a frozen field. And it was heard, because the Duke was not at the dinner. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. He had sat through the soup and the fish and Lady Honoria's laughter as long as a man could. Then, in the way he had risen and made his quiet excuses and gone out. Not to the drawing room. Away from the noise, into the dark, unlit half of the house where no one followed him. It was where he went. It was how he survived his own hospitality. He was standing at that moment in the cold passage outside the small saloon, in the dark, on his way to nowhere. He was alone with the silence he had built, and the silence broke over him. He did not, at first, understand what he was hearing. It had been so long. Then he understood, and it went through him like cold water. It was like a hand laid on a wound 8 years shut. Music, in his mother's house. Not the pretty flat noise of the drawing room. Not that. This. A harp played the way his mother had played it, from somewhere under the notes, from the place where people keep the things they cannot say. He stood in the dark and could not move. He did not know the piece. He did not need to know it. He knew the way you know a language you were born into, exactly what it was saying. It was saying that everything had been lost, and the player was still here, and it still hurt, and it was still beautiful. It was saying the very thing he had forbidden his whole house to say for 8 years. He came to the door of the little saloon without deciding to. He stood in the dark of the passage, outside the reach of the single candle. He looked in, and he saw her. He had never seen her. That was the truth he would sit with, after, in shame and in wonder. She had played in his drawing room every night for 3 weeks, and he had never once seen her. He had trained himself not to see the music, and she had come with it in the corner furniture. Now here she was, alone, thinking herself alone. A slight, grave girl at a small harp, with her whole face open at last, wet and unashamed, playing his mother's silence into sound. Her eyes were shut. Her strong, clever hands moved on the strings the way water finds the sea, and on her plain, pale, unnoticed face was the thing he had not seen on any face in 8 years, including his own. It was grief that had made its peace, and turned, on the far side, into something very like joy. He stood in the dark and watched a stranger say aloud everything he had spent 8 years refusing to feel. She said it in the only language that had ever reached him. And Giles of Whitlock, who had decided that the cure for loving was not to love again, felt the decision crack straight down the middle. It cracked like ice on a moor pond in the first thaw. She did not know he was there. That was the thing the whole night turned upon, the thing he would remember longest. She had not played it for him. She had not played it for anyone. She had thought herself alone and unwatched and unheard. So she had, for once, told the truth, and he had heard it by accident, in the dark, uninvited, the way you overhear a prayer. The piece ended. Her hands came to rest. She sat with her eyes still shut and her face still open, spent. And in the passage the Duke stood without breathing. He was terrified that she would look up and see him, and shut again. He was terrified that the truth would notice it had been overheard, and take itself back. Then, in the next room, the dinner ended. There was the scrape of chairs, the rise of voices, the tide turning toward the door, and Rosamond's face closed. He watched it happen. He watched the grave, guarded girl come back down over the open one, like a shutter. She wiped her face quickly, with the back of one strong hand. Her fingers found, without a flaw, the simple waltz she was paid to play. By the time Lady Honoria swept in on a wave of company, the harp was playing wallpaper again. It was soft and pretty, and it meant nothing. The woman at it was furniture. No one in the bright crowd could have told you there had been anything else in the room at all. No one but the man in the dark passage. He drew back before the light reached him. He went up the black stairs to his own rooms and sat a long time without a candle. For the first time in 8 years, he was not alone with silence. He was alone with a sound. And he could not, though he tried, remember the colour of Lady Honoria's gown. He could not remember a single word anyone had said at his own table. Of that whole long evening, he could remember nothing else. Only a plain grave girl in a dim room with her eyes shut, telling the truth to no one. Only him in the passage, overhearing it, and being brought back to life against all his long, careful arrangements. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark, and listened to the sound again in his memory, note by note, the way a starving man remembers a meal. By morning he had made a resolution. It was the first genuine resolution he had made in 8 years that had anything to do with the living. He would find out who she was. It should have been simple. He was the Duke. She was in his own house. A word to his steward would have brought her name and history in an hour. But he found, to his own surprise, that he did not want to ask the steward. He did not want her handled by the machinery of the house, brought and named and dismissed like a tradesman's bill. What he had overheard had been private. It felt like a theft already, what he had done in the passage. He did not want to compound it by having her researched behind her back. He wanted to be introduced to her, like a person, like a man to a woman, as though the dark passage had never happened, and he were only meeting for the first time the young lady who played. This was not easy to arrange. A duke does not simply present himself to a hired harpist. But there was one person at Eastmoor who could arrange anything. She had, he suspected, been waiting 8 years for him to want something. He went to his great-aunt. Lady Tryphena received him in her own small sitting-room. She spent her days there now, wrapped in shawls by a fire kept high summer and winter, missing nothing. She looked at him a long moment when he came in. She was very old and very sharp, and she had watched his face across a great many rooms. She saw at once that something in it had moved. "You've slept badly," she said. "Or not at all. Sit down. You're too tall standing up. It tires me." He sat. He did not know how to begin. So, being his mother's son under all the frost, he began with the truth. "There was music last night," he said, "in the small saloon, during the dinner." The old woman's dry face did not change, but something behind it grew very still and very attentive. "There was," she said. "I arranged it. The harpist. Lady Honoria wanted wallpaper." She said the word with a flick of contempt so light it was easy to miss. "Did it disturb you? I can send her away." She watched him as she said it, the way an angler watches a line. "No," he said too quickly, and then more slowly, and it cost him something, for he had not spoken the word aloud in that house in 8 years. "It was like my mother." Now the old woman's face did change. It softened all at once into something young and grieved and glad. For a moment she looked less like an ancient duchess than like a girl who has heard good news she had stopped hoping for. "Yes," she said quietly. "I thought it might be. I heard it too from my room. I have not heard playing like that since your mother sat at the gold harp." She looked at the fire. "I hired a girl to play waltzes for a fool. It seems I hired something else. God is occasionally generous, Giles, even to the old. Who is she?" "Her name is Miss Renham. Rosamond Renham. She came from an agency in town." Lady Tryphina's sharp eyes came back to his face. "A gentleman's daughter, by her speech and her hands. Come down in the world. There is a great deal of that about now. She's very quiet and very proud. She's here for money, though she would die before she said so. That is all I know." A pause. "It is not, I think, all you wish to know." "I should like to be introduced to her," said the Duke, and found that his heart was going like a boy's. "Properly." And Lady Tryphina, who had waited 8 years, allowed herself, for the first time in longer than that, to smile. The introduction was arranged with the old woman's particular art. It was made to seem like nothing. Lady Tryphina let it be known that she wished the harpist to play for her privately, in her own sitting room, in the mornings. Old women may indulge themselves. And so Rosamond was sent for the very next morning to play for the dowager alone. She came in with her music, and found that the dowager was not alone. The Duke of Whitlock was standing by the window. Rosamond stopped in the doorway. She knew him, of course. She had played in his drawing-room 3 weeks, and watched him sit like a shut door through all of it. But he had never once, that she had seen, so much as turned his head toward her. Now he was here, in his aunt's room, in the morning, looking at her. He looked directly, gravely, with a kind of careful attention she had not had turned upon her by anyone in 3 years. She did not know what to do with it. So she did the thing she always did. She went very still, and gave nothing away. "Miss Renham," said Lady Tryphina from her chair, dry and easy, as though dukes stood in her window every day of the week. "My great-nephew, Whitlock, he has developed, rather suddenly, an interest in music. Giles, this is Miss Renham, who plays better than anyone I have heard in 20 years. She will be embarrassed that I have said so, which is why I said it. Sit down, child, and play me something. Not a waltz. I am too old for waltzes. Play me something true." And Rosamond sat down at the harp with the Duke's tawny eyes upon her, and her heart unaccountably loud. She played, for the second time in that house, something true, It was not the mother's piece. She would never play that again where it could be heard. It had been an accident, a wound opening, and she had shut it. But she played, for the sharp old woman who had asked for truth, something near it, something of her own, grave and strong and unashamed. And the Duke stood at the window and listened. This time she knew he was listening. It was entirely different and entirely the same. When she finished, there was a silence. Then Lady Tryphena said, "There. Now you have heard it awake, Giles, and not through a wall." Rosamond's head came up sharply. She looked at the Duke and understood all at once from his face. He had been the one in the passage. The night she thought herself alone, she had not been alone. The truth she had told to no one had been overheard by this man, this shut-faced, silent Duke, and it had done to him whatever it was that had put that look on his face now. She should have been angry. She waited to be angry. But she found, looking at him, that she was not. And the reason she was not frightened her more than anger would have. He did not look like a man who had spied on her. He looked like a man who had been given something he had stopped believing in. He looked the way she had felt, playing. "I beg your pardon," he said. His voice was low and even, and he said it to her as though she were a person, and not furniture. "For the other night. I did not mean to overhear you. I was in the passage in the dark, and there was music where there has been none in 8 years, and I could not make myself go away. It was yours, and private, and I stole it. I am sorry. And I am not sorry, because it was the first thing I have felt in a very long time." He stopped. He was not a man who spoke easily, and this was costing him everything. "I only wished to thank you," he said. "That is all this is." It was not all it was. They both knew that already, standing in the old woman's warm room with the fire going and the moor grey in the window. But it was where it began. The mornings after that were the strangest and best hours Rosamond had known in 3 years. She would come at 10 with her music, and play for the Dowager for a while. Then the Duke would come in quietly, and sit a little apart, and listen. He never asked her to perform. That was the first thing she noticed, and the thing that undid her guard faster than any flattery could have done. Everyone who had ever admired her playing had wanted something from it. He seemed to want nothing but to be in the room while it happened. One morning, when the Dowager had dozed off in her chair by the fire, he spoke to her across the quiet. "My mother used to say that a great player does not play the notes," he said. "She said the notes are only the road. The playing is the country you travel through to reach the person listening." He looked at the harp, not at Rosamond. "I did not understand her. I was a boy, and I thought it was the sort of thing mothers say. I understood it the night I heard you through the wall. You were not playing notes. You were letting me walk the whole way to wherever you were standing." Rosamond's hands went still on the strings. "Where I was standing was not a place a duke should visit," she said, before she could stop herself. It was the nearest she had come to telling him the truth of her life. She heard the bitterness in it, and was ashamed, and looked down. "No," he agreed gently. "It was a cold one. I could hear that too. I have been in it myself, though mine had a great deal more furniture." A silence. Then, so low, she was not sure the sleeping old woman could have heard it even awake. "I have not wanted to travel anywhere, Miss Renham, in 8 years. I find this week that I want to travel there, wherever it is you play from. I know I have no right to ask the road of you. I only wanted you to know that I would take it, if you ever chose to show it." She did not answer. She could not. But she began, the next morning, without deciding to play a little less carefully, an inch nearer the truth each day. He never remarked on it. He only came, and sat, and listened, and let her come toward him at the speed a frightened creature comes, which is the only speed that lasts. From that day, the shape of Rosamond's life at Eastmoor quietly changed. At first, only Lady Tryphena knew it, for Lady Tryphena had designed it. There were the morning hours in the Dowager's sitting-room. Without anyone naming it so, they became the hours the Duke happened also to be free. He did not intrude. He was careful past all telling. He would come in and sit and listen. Now and then he would speak. Of music first, which was safe. Then slowly, over days, of other things, of his mother, whom he had spoken of to no one in 8 years, and now spoke of to a hired harpist in his aunt's room. She was the one person in the house who had heard the sound his mother left behind, and understood what it had cost to lose it. And Rosamond, guarded to the bone, proud as only the fallen are proud, found herself telling him things in return. Not all at once, not the whole of it. But she told him about her mother, and the harp inside which she had sat as a child, and the piece with no name that lived nowhere but in her hands. She did not tell him about Edmund. She did not tell him about the sum in the stocking, or the men in the town, or the real reason a gentleman's daughter sells the one thing she loves for shillings. That she kept. That was hers. It was shameful, and it was the lever by which the whole world could still hurt her. She had learned never to hand anyone that lever, least of all a duke. But she told him enough, and he told her more than enough. And the strangest thing was watching the house change around the two of them, as the silence of 8 years thawed in a season. The servants heard the harp in the mornings, and did not know what to make of it. Lady Honoria heard of the morning hours, and knew exactly what to make of it, and grew, day by day, more brightly, more dangerously charming. For Lady Honoria was not a fool. She was the opposite of a fool. She had spent a summer's work and a great deal of calculation on the Duke of Whitlock. Now she felt the ground shift under her, the way an animal feels weather. She could not have said at first what was wrong. The Duke was as coldly civil to her as ever. He danced with no one, courted no one, said nothing she could hold against the day she needed it. But he was different. There was a thaw in him she had not made and could not account for. It was a man coming slowly awake, and the waking was not turned toward her. She watched, and she was patient, and she was clever. It did not take her long to find the crack. It ran, she saw, straight to the corner of every room. It ran to the small harp, and to the grave, quiet nothing of a girl she had hired to be wallpaper. That the Duke of Whitlock might prefer a penniless hired harpist to herself did not, at first, seem to Lady Honoria a real danger. It seemed an insult and an absurdity, and a thing to be corrected. Men had fancies. This was a fancy. It would pass if it were starved. She set herself to starve it. She could not send Rosamond away. That was the Dowager's affair, and the Dowager, she now understood, was against her. But she could do a great many other things. She could make the girl's life at Eastmoor a slow, cold misery, and she could watch, with a smile, to see how long pride lasts on an empty stomach. So the small cruelties began. They were the kind that leave no mark and cannot be complained of. Rosamond's music went missing before an evening, and was found after kicked under a chair. The fire in her cold room stopped being lit. Her evening summons came later and later, and lasted longer, so that she was kept up past midnight, playing wallpaper for a company that had forgotten she was there. Lady Honoria was always sweetness itself to her face. "You look tired, Miss Renham. Do not let us keep you, though of course we shall need you until the last guest goes." Behind the sweetness, the screw turned and turned, and Rosamond, who had endured worse for Edmund's sake, endured this too. She thought of the sun, climbing at last within sight of its top. She thought of the new year. She held on. There was one evening that stayed with her longer than the rest. Lady Honoria had been singing and had missed a note badly, and the company had been too polite to seem to hear it. In the little pause after, she turned to the corner with her lovely smile in place. "Miss Renham lost the time," she said to the room. "One cannot sing above a wandering accompaniment. Do try to keep with me. There's a good girl. It is not a difficult part. A child could manage it. It was a lie, and everyone with an ear knew it was a lie, and no one said so." Rosamond inclined her head and murmured that she was sorry. She was not sorry. She had held the time like iron, under a voice that could not find it. But she had learned long ago that the truth is a luxury the poor cannot always afford, and she paid the small false coin of the apology, and played on, and let the beautiful woman keep her lie. What Lady Honoria did not know was that the Duke had been in the doorway. He had heard the missed note, and the lie, and the meek apology that answered it. He said nothing then, but that was the evening, he told Rosamond long after, when he stopped thinking of what he felt as a danger to be managed, and began thinking of it as the only sane thing left in the house. A man may forgive a woman a great deal. He found he could not forgive Lady Honoria for making Rosamond apologize for her own excellence. It told him everything about both women in a single stroke. But there was one cruelty Lady Honoria stumbled upon by accident. It was the one that mattered, because it was the true lever, the one Rosamond had kept from everyone. She found out about the letters. Rosamond wrote to Edmund every week. She had to. He was 17, and frightened, and in over his head. Her letters were the rope she threw him across the miles. They were steady, hard, loving, full of the one message that kept him from doing something final. "Hold on. It is nearly enough. Do nothing. I am coming for you. Hold on." But the letters had to be got to the town, and a woman in her position could not simply walk to the post. So she had made a quiet arrangement with a young footman named Dawes. He was a decent lad who took her letters down with the households on his afternoons off. He asked no questions. He took the penny she pressed on him as though it shamed him. Lady Honoria found a letter. It was half written, left in the music on the harp in a careless moment. She read it before Rosamond could cross the room. There was no name in it, but Lady Honoria was clever enough to read what was under the words. She read desperation. She read a secret. She read money owing, and a person hidden, and a proud girl doing something shameful to save someone. And she understood, with a bright, cold flare of triumph, that she had found the crack in the stone at last. She did not say what she knew. That was her art. She gave the half-letter back with a word about how touching it was that Miss Renham had family to write to. She watched Rosamond's face go carefully blank, and she knew she had her. From that day, Lady Honoria set herself quietly to learn the rest. She had doors watched. She had it found out where his afternoon letters went, and to whom, and what name was on them. She had it found out what that name owed, and to which men in the town. It took her a fortnight. At the end of it she knew everything. The brother, the debt, the men, the commission, the sum. She knew the whole of Rosamond Renham's hidden heart. She held it, and she waited, because she was not a woman to spend a weapon early. She would spend it once, in front of everyone. At the moment it would do the most harm. But first she dealt with doors. She could not have a servant in the house who was loyal to the girl. So she went to the housekeeper, with a cold, careless word. The footman, Dawes, she said, had been carrying private letters out of the house on his own account, to persons in the town of low character. It had the shape of truth, and it ruined him. Dawes was to be turned off without a character, which for a young man in service is very near to being turned out to starve. Rosamond heard of it at the door of the servants' hall, white to the lips. The boy had done nothing but carry her letters. He was to lose his place, and his bread, and his good name, for her sake, and she had not the power to save him. She had no standing in that house. She had only a stocking of shillings that was not yet full, and a secret that was no longer a secret at all. She did the only thing she could. She went for the first time, uninvited, to Lady Tryphena, and she told the old woman the plain truth of it, and asked her to save the boy if she could. She did not ask for herself. She asked for Dawes. Lady Tryphena heard her out in silence, her sharp old eyes very bright, and when it was done, she said only, "The footman will keep his place. Leave that to me." Then the old woman looked at her a long moment. "As for the rest of it, child, you have carried a great weight a long way, and told no one. You have been ashamed of the one thing in your life you should be proudest of. That is a pity. But it is nearly over now. I think it is very nearly over." Rosamond did not understand her. She understood only that Dawes was saved, and wept with the relief of it, and did not see the old woman watching her with something that was almost hope. For the ball was coming, and the dowager, who missed nothing, had begun to see the shape of what her great-nephew meant to do. There was to be a ball at Eastmoor at last. It would be the first in 8 years, and everyone knew what it meant. The Duke had not danced, had not entertained, had not let the house be lit and filled since his mother died. That he was doing so now was the talk of 3 counties. Lady Honoria let it be understood, by every art she possessed, that the ball was as good as an announcement. The Duke was coming back to the world, she implied, for her sake. She would stand up first with him, and the thing would be settled. She half believed it herself. And she meant, in the middle of that lit and crowded night, in front of every person of consequence for 20 miles, to destroy Rosamond Renham. She would do it so completely that the Duke's strange fancy would die of shame on the spot. Then the field would be clear, and the story would end the way she had always meant it to end. Rosamond was to play at the ball. Of course she was. She was the harpist. She would sit in the corner and play while her betters danced, wallpaper to the last. She dreaded it, and she was grateful for it, both at once. The ball meant a great wage, and the great wage meant the sum was, at last, almost enough. 1 more quarter. She had written it to Edmund that week, in the letter Lady Honoria did not intercept. "Hold on. It is nearly here. By the new year, you are safe. Hold on." She did not know the trap that was set. She knew only the sum, climbing at last within sight of its top. And she went down to the ball that night in her one good black gown, with her heart, for the first time in 3 years, holding something like hope. There was one quiet moment, 2 days before the ball, that Rosamond would hold on to through everything that came after. She was practicing alone in the drawing room in the grey afternoon, thinking herself unobserved, when she felt him in the doorway. She did not stop playing. That was new. A month before, she would have stopped at once, and stood, and made herself small. She let the music go on, and he came and stood by the harp, and for a while neither of them spoke. "You are not afraid of me any more," he said at last. It was not a question, and there was wonder in it. "No," she said. "I do not know when that stopped. I only know it has." She looked up at him then, this grave-shut man who had been kind to her without once asking a wage for the kindness. "I am afraid of a great many things, Your Grace. I am afraid nearly all the time, but I have stopped being afraid of you. It is a rest I did not expect to be given." He looked as though she had handed him something worth more than the house they stood in. He did not touch her. He was too careful, and she was too poor, and the distance between a duke and a hired girl was a real thing that neither of them pretended away. But he stood by her harp in the failing light while she played, and something passed between them in that grey room that did not need a hand or a word to be complete. She did not know, playing, that Lady Honoria already held the knife. She only knew that for the first time in 3 years she was not entirely alone in the world. It was nearly enough to make a proud woman careless. It was nearly enough to make her hope. The night of the ball, Eastmoor was lit from cellar to attic for the first time in 8 years. Every candle in the house was burning. The drive was full of carriages. The hall was full of flowers cut from the cold houses. The great rooms were full of light and silk, and the roar of a county turned out in its best. And in the corner of the long drawing room, at her small harp, in her plain black gown, sat Rosamond Renham. She played softly under the noise, and watched the bright turning crowd the way the poor always watch the rich at play. She watched from a great distance and very close. She saw the Duke. He was doing his duty, moving through his own rooms, grave and courteous and shut. Once, passing near her corner, he had looked at her. One look, steady and warm and quick. It went through her the way the music once went through the floor and into her bones. She bent her head to the strings so that no one should see her face. She played on. She thought about the sum. She thought about Edmund, safe by the new year. She did not see Lady Honoria watching her from across the room, with the bright, cold patience of a cat at a mouse-hole, waiting for the moment when the most people were looking. The moment came near midnight. There was a lull, the kind that falls on a great room by chance, a hollow in the noise. Into it Lady Honoria stepped, brilliant and smiling, at the centre of the floor. The Duke was a little way off, and half the county was within earshot. She had a glass in her hand. She raised her clear, carrying voice, as though to make some pretty toast. The room turned toward her, delighted, and she began. She began kindly. That was the cruelty of it. "How pleasant our music has been tonight," she said, smiling toward the corner. Heads turned to Rosamond, who went still. "We are so fortunate in our little harpist. Though I confess I have wondered, We have all wondered, have we not? What brings a young woman of Miss Renham's evident breeding to play for hire in other people's houses? A soft laugh here and there, the screw beginning to turn. One does not like to pry, but I have learned the answer, and I think it does her credit. And I mean to say it. I cannot bear to see merit hidden. Rosamond's hands had stopped on the strings. She knew. Before a word of it was out, she knew. The way you know the floor is gone before you have finished falling. And there was nothing at all, that she could do. She plays, said Lady Honoria, sweet and clear and merciless, into the waiting silence of 100 people, to buy her brother out of a debt of honour he cannot pay. A boy of 17, run wild in the town, into the hands of moneylenders and worse. There is a commission wanted, and it must be bought, and there is no one to buy it but this devoted sister. She sells her playing, shilling by shilling, to save a young man from the jail he has richly earned. The smile widened. The eyes were ice. Is it not touching? I did wonder that a duke's aunt should take up so particular a young person. Now we know. She is not a musician at all, in truth. She is a girl in trade, buying a scapegrace out of the gutter, and playing at gentility in our drawing-rooms to do it. I felt you should all know whom you have been applauding. One likes to know. She had done it beautifully. That was the thing Rosamond understood, sitting frozen at the harp while the words fell. Lady Honoria had wrapped every cruelty in the language of praise. She had made shame sound like admiration, so that a listener would swallow it whole before he tasted the poison in it. It does her credit. So devoted. Is it not touching? Each phrase was a small, bright knife, turned so the blade caught the candlelight and looked like a jewel. And under all of it ran the one true message, meant for every ear in the county. This woman is not one of us. She is a servant with a secret and a beggar with a debt, and you have been applauding her. And now you may stop. The silence after was the worst sound Rosamond had ever heard. 100 faces turned to her. She watched them do what faces do. The little recoil, the exchanged glance, the quick pity that is worse than contempt, and the contempt that wears the borrowed face of pity. She sat at the harp in her black gown, with her whole hidden heart torn open and held up to the light of 100 candles. There was nowhere to look, and nothing to say, and no way in the world to make it not be true. It was true. That was the thing. Every word was true. She had sold her mother's gift, shilling by shilling, to save a foolish boy. She'd been ashamed of it, and hidden it. Now it was out, and she was, in front of the whole county, exactly the thing Lady Honoria had named her. A girl in trade, a servant with a shameful secret. Nothing. She rose from the harp. She did not know what she meant to do. There was nothing to do. She only knew she could not sit there and be looked at another moment. And in the terrible silence, before she could take a step toward the door, another voice spoke. It was low and even, and it fell into the hush of that great bright room like a stone into a still pond. Every head turned toward it. It was the Duke. Yes, said Giles of Whitlock. Every word of that is true. Lady Honoria's smile faltered, just slightly. This was not the script. She had expected him to look away, to let the fancy die of shame, to be as glad as any man to be shown the mud on the boots of the woman who had turned his head. She had not expected him to speak, and she certainly had not expected what came next. She sells her playing to save her brother, the Duke went on, He was not looking at Lady Honoria. He was walking, slowly, across the cleared floor toward the corner, toward the girl standing white and straight beside the harp. He was speaking to the whole room, but his eyes were on Rosamond. She has done, for 3 years, the hardest thing I know of. She has taken the one thing she loves in the world, the thing her mother left her, the thing she plays better than any soul in this county. She plays it better, he said, and his voice did not rise, but it carried to the walls, than any of us has the ear to deserve. And she has spent it, night by night, in cold corners of other people's houses, on people who looked through her, to buy a foolish boy she loves out of the ruin he made. She has done it without one word of complaint. She has hidden it out of pride. She has been ashamed of the noblest thing in this room. He had reached her now. He stopped before her. The whole county watched. Lady Honoria has told you this to shame her, he said. She has told me the best thing I have ever heard of anyone. I thank her for it. You could have heard a pin drop on the far side of the house. 3 weeks ago, said the Duke, and now he spoke only to Rosamond, though the room drank every word. I stood in the dark outside a door, and I heard someone play the truth into this house for the first time since my mother died. I did not know who it was. I only knew that I had been asleep for 8 years, and that the sound had woken me, and that I would give the rest of my life to hear it again. He was very pale. His hands were not quite steady. This shut, cold Duke was coming apart in front of his whole world, and he did not seem to care who saw. I have been trying, these 3 weeks, to find a way to say a thing to you, Miss Renham. I have been too great a coward. And now Lady Honoria has been kind enough to strip away every reason I had to wait. So I will say it here, since here is where we are. He drew a breath. I do not want a harpist. I never wanted a harpist. I want the woman who played that night, when she thought no one could hear. I want to spend my life making very sure that you never again have to sell what you love to save the people you love. Marry me. Let me buy your brother's commission as your husband, and never speak of it again. Let there be music in this house for as long as we both live. Marry me, Rosamond. I am asking you in front of everyone, because you have had to hide for 3 years, and I will be damned before I let you hide one day more. It is not recorded what Lady Honoria Ashcombe did in that moment. No one was looking at her. Every eye in the great bright room was on the plain grave girl in the black gown, standing by the small harp, with her torn open heart and her wet, unashamed face. It was the face he had seen once, in a dark passage, and looked for ever since. She was weeping. She was not ashamed of it. And when she found her voice, in the ringing silence of the whole listening county, she did not make a speech. She had never been a woman of speeches. She said only the truest thing she had, in a voice that shook and did not break. Yes. For a moment the great bright room did not seem to know what to do with itself, for it had come expecting one story and been given another entirely. Then someone began to clap near the back, an old squire who had known the dead Duchess and had missed the music too. The sound spread across the crowd, the way warmth spreads across a cold hand, slowly, and then all at once. Within a minute, the whole county was applauding a hired harpist in a plain black gown. They clapped as though she were the finest thing they had seen in a 12-month. And Rosamond stood in the middle of it, weeping and not ashamed, and understood that the very people who had recoiled from her a minute before were now delighted with her, because a duke had told them to be. She might have been bitter about that, and had some right to be. She was not. She had spent too long being looked through to despise now the simple fact of being seen. There was a great deal to be done before there could be a wedding, and the Duke did it all himself, quietly, in the space of a fortnight. He sent a man of business to the town. The men who held Edmund's debt were paid in full, and paid a little more to make certain they understood the account was closed forever. A commission was bought in a good regiment, under a colonel the Duke knew and trusted, and a letter went to a frightened boy in cheap lodgings. It told him that the thing he had prayed for and stopped believing in had happened. He was to come to Eastmoor for his sister's wedding. He was to come as a gentleman, for he was one again. Edmund came. Rosamond met him in the hall, and for a long moment neither of them could speak. He was thinner than when she had seen him last, and older about the eyes. But he was safe now. He was free. He was standing in a great house as a guest, and not a shame. "You did this," he said at last, and his voice broke on it. "All these years. You never said? Rosa, you never once said what it was costing you." She held his face in her two strong hands, the hands that had bought his freedom string by string, and she told him the only thing that mattered. "It cost me nothing I was not glad to spend," she said. "And look what it has bought, past all my deserving. Now stand up straight and stop weeping. You are an officer. Officers do not weep in halls." And he laughed through the tears, the old warm laugh she remembered, and the last cold weight she had carried for 3 years went quietly off her shoulders and did not come back. They were married before the new year, quietly, in the little church at the edge of the moor. The dowager wept frankly in the front pew. Edmund Renham stood up beside his sister in a new coat, a debt to no man now, his commission bought, his colonel chosen. He was a decent, frightened boy, set at last on an honest road, unable to speak for the size of what his sister had done, and what had, past all deserving, come of it. Lady Honoria Ashcombe was not present. She had left Eastmoor the morning after the ball, in the cold, in her carriage, in a silence of her own. If the county talked of her for a season, it soon found better things to talk of, as counties do. And Dawes the footman kept his place, and rose in it. He told the story to his own grandchildren, 50 years on, and always ended it the same way. He had carried the letters, he would say. He had carried the letters that bought the boy his commission, and won the girl her duke. And the harp came down from the north room. That was the thing the servants remembered longest, the thing the old ones would tell the young ones years after. In the first week of the new marriage, the Duke himself went up to the cold north room. He took the holland sheet off the great gilded harp that had stood covered 8 years. He had it carried down to the long drawing-room and set in the light of the tall windows where his mother had used to play. The servants stood in the doorways to watch it carried down, the young ones who had never heard it, and the old ones who had wept for the loss of it. No one spoke. It was like watching a coffin carried the wrong way, out of the ground and back into the light. The house seemed to hold its breath as the gold frame passed through its cold rooms and into the warm one. Some of the older women were crying, and did not trouble to hide it, and were not ashamed. Then it was set in its old place by the tall windows, and the holland sheet was folded away for good. and the thing that had been dead in that house for 8 years was quietly, plainly alive again. And that evening, and every evening after, there was music at Eastmoor again. Not wallpaper, not waltzes for fools. The true thing, played by a woman who no longer had to hide it, in a house that had learned the long hard way, a simple thing. The cure for grief is not silence, but sound. And the cure for loving is not to stop, but to begin again. The years that followed were kinder to them both than either had learned to expect. They came, as the best years do, without much drama worth the telling. There was a great deal of music at Eastmoor now. The woman of the house had spent 3 years starved of the one thing she did best, and she made up for the famine slowly. Each evening she filled the long rooms with the sound the old Duchess had left behind, and the new one had brought back to life. There were children in time, though that is another story, and a gentler one. They grew up inside music, the way their father had once grown up inside silence. They never knew, until they were old enough to be told, how near the whole warm house had come to never being at all. Edmund rose in his regiment, and did his sister no more shame. He came home on his leaves a straighter, steadier man each year. And he always went first, before he greeted a soul, to stand a moment beside the great gilded harp that had brought him back his life. As for the Duke, he had married for the sound of a soul telling the truth in the dark. He learned, in the years after, that a man who lets himself be woken once must go on being woken every day after. That is only another word for being alive. It was worth, he came to think, every one of the 8 cold years it had cost him to learn it. He had kept a silence for the woman he lost. He kept, for the woman he found, a house full of sound instead, which is the better monument, and the one the dead would have chosen for him had anyone thought to ask. She played the piece with no name, in the end. The one her mother made, and never wrote down. The one that lived nowhere in the world, but in her 2 hands. She had thought she would never play it again where it could be heard. But she played it now, in the lit drawing room, for her husband. He had first overheard it in the dark, and known it for what it was. It was not a performance. It was not a wage. It was not a thing for hire. It was a soul telling the truth, and trusting at last that someone was listening. She had spent 3 years playing beautifully to a world that looked through her, and meaning nothing at all by any of it. Now, at last, she played the whole of herself to the one man who had heard her before he ever saw her face. And he was listening. For the rest of both their lives, he was.